Thanks for joining us in studio
Thank you
today.
for having me.
It's been about 24 hours since you reached out to us about the issue that you had with your son JJ, who takes a wheelchair-accessible bus to and from school. But yesterday the bus lift stuck not once but twice. You were called to pick him up off the bus. Let's start with what happened yesterday and what, in your view, really needs to be done to address students who are vulnerable, that can't be sitting out someplace exposed, and really need people to hear what their situation is so that it can be made better.
Right. Well, yesterday morning the bus was stuck on the way. As a result, apparently there was a malfunction with the wheelchair lift itself. And as a result, they were roughly about 90 minutes late picking him up for school. Which, I mean, it cuts into his school day, but isn't a newsworthy item in itself. But come the end of the school day, they chose to send out the same bus. Apparently they have one back up and it's down. And because of that, predictably, they broke down the same exact way in the afternoon. The wheelchair lift was stuck down, meaning that they can't go anywhere because it's on the ground. And further meaning that the door that opens for the wheelchair lift is stuck open. So you have about a 6 foot by 4 to 5 foot window in the back of the bus on a 30-degree day where kids are stuck inside. It's more than just, you or I, standing in a room or pacing back and forth in a 30-degree room where, you have a skinny little guy, sitting stationary in a chair for 90 minutes in 30-degree weather. I think that there's, I spoke with the assistant manager of the bus yard yesterday when I got home after I spoke with you folks, and I spoke with the manager this morning, and I think that there's a number of things that can be done, and based on my conversation with him this morning, hopefully are being enacted to deal with this sort of thing. I think it's unfortunate that they have to wait for this sort of thing to happen. I wish there was a little bit more proactivity as opposed to just reacting to problems that have happened, but they are looking into, at my suggestion last night, providing some sort of like blanket covering for the door when the door is open, if the door is stuck open for some reason. And they're also additionally, I was told by the manager, they're trying to put in a requisition for 2 additional mechanics.
Okay. Because that was the big piece of it, that they had mechanics covering 3 cities and towns, and of which were addressing another problem and simply unable to get to the bus yesterday.
Correct, and it's only 2 mechanics to begin with, and to compound that problem, I mean, they're as you mentioned, they're covering 3 different school districts from that one bus yard, Lincoln, Providence, and Warwick.
That's a big area.
Yeah, it's a lot of square miles.
That's a big area.
And to compound the problem of only having 2 mechanics to cover that area, they chose to send both those mechanics to the same one broken down bus in Lincoln, which leaves the rest of the area that they're covering, high and dry when it comes to a mechanical issue, which is, particularly troubling with this issue yesterday. From my understanding, it was a simple loose wire that if a mechanic had been able to show up, could have just pushed it back in, reattached it, and they would have been on their way. There wouldn't have needed to be all that time just sitting around in the cold. There wouldn't have needed to be all the parents from the bus coming to pick up their kids and try and figure out how to get their kids in a wheelchair off a bus that the wheelchair lift isn't working. Not everybody is big enough or whatever to be able to do that. It's your child in a wheelchair, it's like 140 pounds, 150 pounds in that neighborhood, and that's not a mechanical wheelchair. If your child's in a mechanical wheelchair, they're stuck there, or at least their wheelchair is, and it's just not feasible to pick one of those up. So it's a very tricky situation that you get these kids in and the parents in that they shouldn't have to be in.
Do you feel like you should be maybe on the city payroll because you've made so many recommendations advocating for your son to be able to get the education that he is entitled to by law? As you said, you've had issues, unfortunately, with buses picking him up late. But you said cuts not only into his education, but he gets special services at school that help his health and well-being.
Correct. He has speech, OT, and PT, an hour a week each, and these are services that the school, collects federal money for, to pay for, but then when you sit down at the table in an IEP meeting or whatever, they are doing everything they can to chip away at them. in many instances. And then again, you know, if your child is going to school, there was one string of days in a row that covered about 2 to 3 weeks where he was getting picked up 2 hours late every single day. So that's either cutting a significant, I mean, it's cutting a significant amount of time out of the school day overall, and whatever might be scheduled into that time either has to be made up at the expense of something else, or just has to be forgotten altogether.
And today, as we had discussed earlier, your son just did not go to school. His CNA was out today.
Right.
Which happens, but all these things add up.
Right. Well, and additionally, he's sick today from having been sitting on that school bus all day yesterday, where he's got a head cold, and we just thought, you know, sending him in and dealing with, you know, whatever problems might arise from his nurse not being there would have just compounded the issues from yesterday.
And so really from yesterday, sort of the two main recommendations that you want to see is make sure you have adequate auxiliary heating means for these kids if there's an issue if the door is stuck, blankets, coverings for the door, addressing the needs of the mechanics issue, meaning that they can't be put in this situation without having a mechanic available. And then is the ramp issue a possibility?
I wonder about that, and I understand that, you know, I'm not sure about the mechanics of it. You know, I don't know how that would work or if it could work, but I think that something that hasn't been mentioned yet is that just training the fact is that it was an electronic issue with the wheelchair lift, but wheelchairs are built, these wheelchair lifts are built specifically with manual overrides available. So it works something like like a water pump where you have to pump up and down the handle, but either not all of these aides and drivers are trained to use that, or they just simply didn't choose to. And I'm not sure which one it is, but either way is unacceptable when you're talking about putting the health and welfare of your child in the hands of these folks.
And at the end of the day, as we talked about, is it really, as you mentioned, the training, the preparation, and the contingency plans of sort of there's thinking of those unfortunate worst case scenarios when the lift doesn't work. I mean, these are kids who are in wheelchairs but have limited mobility, and as you said, their parents do. So is that really the big takeaway from this, is that both the school department and the bus yard need to work in collaboration to make sure that sort of all the worst case scenarios are thought through so that in these situations they know what to do?
Absolutely. I think that if they're spend more time working together to try and head off potential problems than they spend trying to pass the buck back and forth between the two, which is typically what happens a lot. I would attribute, you guys writing the article you did last night and helping give this some publicity to getting the reaction I did from the management this morning. In the past, when there have been problems, you call in and they simply say, look, it's not, there's nothing we can do, or they refer you back to the transportation person at the school who you call, and if you can get a hold of them, they refer you back to the bus yard. And so it's just a game of passing the buck back and forth instead of collaborating with each other and potentially with the actual users of the system in the parents and children to figure out what problems need to be addressed and how to best address them.
Now, JJ's at Nathan Bishop now, moving forward, looking to finish up through the middle school. Do you know the plans for high school at this point?
No, we're not entirely sure. So we're working to get him through the academic program and see how well he does there and go from there.
How often do you meet with school officials with issues? I mean, this is IEP, but there's a lot of issues to address. How often do you have sort of sit-down meetings to say, this is what our son needs to get the education that he's entitled to?
It really depends on how squeaky a wheel you are, how often you get oiled. We are very proactive in his life and in his schooling, and as such, we try to meet with them as often as humanly possible, which is, give or take, this year has been about once a month, once every 6 weeks, to discuss his schooling situation, because we discovered something that they slid past us in his IEP, moving him to a totally different program.
What type of program?
So instead of an inclusive program, which he's been in his entire school existence here, they moved him back into an adjusted degree program, which basically seemed to have meant to us that he would just hang out in a special ed classroom and get an adjusted diploma at the end of his school career, but there wouldn't be any effort to move him forward academically.
And they did this without your
Yeah, we
Permission?
I mean, they give you an IEP. An IEP is like 20 or 30 pages long. You sit in a half hour to 45-minute, maybe an hour meeting, talking about what's going on that year with all these officials, and they know what's in this IEP, and you're talking about various issues, and then at the end they're like, look, you have to sign this, we have to get out of here, sign this and do
So
this.
you feel a pressure to...
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a distraction from what they're trying. I feel like it was a distraction from what they were trying to get past us, where we're talking about issues with his assistant at school, personnel issues that we shouldn't have to be addressing, that management or the principal of the school should be addressing. And instead of doing that, we're stuck talking about them spending most of the time at the IEP meeting addressing those issues. And then, back door, here comes this complete change program that we weren't told about. And we were, in fact, told completely the opposite, switching to middle schools. We were told he had to go to this middle school because it was the only one with an inclusive program and so forth. And then he gets there and we find out he's not even in the inclusive program. And just by looking at his homework and then saying, what's going on here? And they say, well, you should have known about this. Well, we should have, but there's a limited amount of time that you're going over these things. And it's very difficult to stay on top of every paragraph in a 20 to 30 page IEP plan.
And you reached out to us with the incident that took place yesterday, but it must be a difficult position as a parent to be in, because there are other parents who have children with needs, but because you spend so much time focusing, each need is different, each child is different, each situation is different. It's not even as though you could kind of coalesce together, because these kids have such a different set of needs. You're so focused on your one child, you feel like you're the only advocate for them out there.
Right.
What would you say to other parents who have encountered issues that feel maybe that same way? Reach out to the press, reach out to the school department?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it depends on how squeaky a wheel you are to go get oiled. And you really have to make sure that you will feel like you're being a thorn in their side, but that's what you should be doing. It's, you have to be out there. And yeah, you may not be letting this person, slack off and have an easy day, but they're slacking off and having an easy day is at the expense of your child. And when you weigh out whether or not you're going to be bothering somebody or whether or not your child's going to be getting the services, attention, and everything that they need at school, your child has to win out by a great margin. So it's important to be active and be outspoken when you find issues and when you find shortcomings and so forth.
And what had occurred yesterday, which again you can read about on GoLocal. Well, as we have you in here, Randy, and you've sort of got the floor, so to speak, anything again addressing maybe the school department, as a final takeaway, what you'd like to see now moving forward?
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I think that more proactivity in terms of being able to anticipate some of these problems, being able to address some of these problems and just having contingency plans in place. You have, schools with a single elevator and no other method of getting kids up from one floor to the next. Why don't you have a contingency plan in place? You leave the choice of a child being left down in like a basement room on his own doing schoolwork with an assistant, or being carried up flights of stairs by teachers in his wheelchair, which is wildly unsafe and unsettling as a parent to hear from him, where he says, I was scared, I thought they were going to drop me, or yesterday, I was cold and I feel bad for this is what he's telling us when he gets home. I was cold, I didn't know when you guys were coming, and then he gets home and he's worried about his friends who are still on the bus and feeling badly for them. And it's a situation that he shouldn't have to be put in, and it's a situation that children shouldn't have to get in order to later on address these issues. There should be some kind of foresight and some kind of effort to, as we said before, collaborate with not only the bus yard and not only other school officials, but also the parents. I think that also there should be some effort to understand, to provide some consistency in schooling. Just this year, going to a new middle school, it was a knockdown, drag-out fight to keep his CNA from last year with him this year. And he's a child who's not verbally communicative, and so it makes it difficult for him to really adjust, even more difficult than normally going to middle school would be,
Yep.
for him to adjust to a new classroom and having all new people around him who then will spend half the year trying to figure out what he's saying, or trying to figure out how to translate, or just trying to figure him out in general. And then the entire IEP team has been replaced, so nobody's there from last year to provide some consistency in management, in just being around him, etc. It's very difficult. It's like you're starting over again entirely.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come in and go even beyond what we had discussed yesterday to let folks know kind of the realities of being a parent with a kid who's got needs that need to be addressed. So, Randy, I appreciate your taking the time to come in. I'm sure we'll talk soon, but again, if you wanted to see the story, again, just one parent's take about trying to get some responsiveness from both the bus yard and the school department to make sure that their child is safe, educated, and his well-being is looked after. So Randy Lutz, I appreciate you taking the time to come in.
Thank you very much.
I'm
for
sure we'll
having me.
talk soon. We'll walk around the corner and I'm going to welcome my next guest in.
All right.
Okay.
Great. Thanks very much.
We'll be right back here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center with our next guest. Don't go anywhere.